And I'm thrilled to welcome Dr. Andrea Leschchak, and I probably botched her last. No, I got it right. Who I was introduced to by my friend Michelle Fritsch, who is in the pharmaceutical world with older adults. And Andrea and I got to chatting, and one of her specialties is helping guide people through traveling with disability and active illness. And I was just like, wow, I can't believe that we haven't had a discussion on this, because this is something, especially as we move into the travel months, that I hear an awful lot about. A typical conversation with friends or connections is it's sort of like, oh, we got to find a place where mom can be because we're going on a family vacation. And not necessarily thinking about how can we travel with mom. It's more, is there somebody that can watch over mom because we're going away without her? And that's might be a solution for some families, and maybe mom doesn't want to travel. But if mom would like to join the family or to travel, we want to make sure that she can do that. So, Andrea, thrilled to have you here today, and am really excited to get in on this discussion. But before we do that, let's get to know you a little bit better. Tell us a little bit about your background and what led you to have an interest in helping people in this area.
Right. Well, first, let me thank you so much for inviting me here. This topic is incredibly personal to me. And when I give you a little bit of background about my story, you'll understand. I've been a pharmacist for almost 30 years, so as old as the source book, it seems. And I was a traditional pharmacist for probably the first 15 years, what many people would think of as a pharmacist. But that last 15 years was spent more in long-term care as a consultant. Geriatrics is my specialty, assisted living with a little bit of hospice. And more recently, I shifted over into an expanded patient advocacy approach. I also do some executive health coaching and biohacking consulting. But within that umbrella of advocacy is this, like I said, this topic of traveling well, traveling until you choose to not, as opposed to people thinking that you just can't do it. And where this came from was I was working at Walgreens. I've been like I said, that more traditional pharmacist pretty much in my whole life. And my mom was diagnosed with a very aggressive form of inflammatory breast cancer. And I think she might have been 55 at the time, 56. And in that nanosecond, of course, everything screeched to a halt and our lives completely changed. Well, my mom worked for the airlines and loved to travel. And all of a sudden, we're faced with this, everything that she thought was going to be in front of her was possibly gone. And as she survived each treatment phase, because that's pretty much what it was, it was just like last ditch measures to get to the next treatment option. She started talking about wanting to take her brand new grandbaby to Disney. And my sister and I are sitting around going, we're watching behind the scenes and we're really questioning it. But darned if she didn't make it through treatment. 9 months later, she's like, I think I can do this. I want to do it. How do we make Disney work? And so my sister and I were running behind the scenes. Gosh, this was about 15 years ago. Not a lot of resources at the time. And so we put together a Disney experience. And there were times, I tell you, during that trip that I thought it was the end, because she was 1 week out of her last chemo and she did not want to sit in the darn wheelchair. She wanted to push it. And I kept thinking, that's okay, because if she goes now, she did what she wanted to do. And so, she ended up making it 4.5 years. And during that time, she visited me when I lived in Europe. I lived in Germany. We walked the Champs-Elysees. We got lost, or she got lost in Belgium, which caused some incredible stress for my husband. But we went back to the homeland, to Poland, and I could just see that every time she did another adventure, there was this sense of hope, that there was a sense of normalcy, and she never lost it. And even though she's no longer with me, fast forward to just more recently with my father with dementia, I watched him as he became more reserved, more quiet. He was already incredibly withdrawn and very much an introvert and possibly on the autism scale, which they don't ever talk about as an older person. And I kept looking at my niece and nephew thinking, my gosh, my dad is such an amazing person. They're not going to have those memories. All they're going to think about is this darn nursing home, And we found workarounds. We found solutions. He went, and now even though he's gone, when my niece talks about Gigi, yeah, I mean, it was a horrible passing in the end for him. Yet she'll also talk about that last trip we took down to Florida where he sat on the back porch with her and they watched the dolphins. And so she has memories of both. It's balanced. And that's why, I'm so committed to this on a practical side, a clinical side, as well as just emotionally. I just can't say how important it is to not sideline ourselves until we have to.
Or we want to. Yeah. I mean, there's and I think that's important too, is that uh, I've seen sort of family members sort of pushing, mom and dad in one direction.
Yep.
But if this is something that your loved one enjoys, but they feel like they can't do it anymore, this is where we can explore some different options. And I think actually this is a great opportunity to sort of bring up. We were promoting this on LinkedIn yesterday, and there was a comment where an individual had a mom and dad. While they could travel, they were nervous about going away and not being close to their doctors. Okay. And I've heard that before. So it's not physically and emotionally and what have you. They could travel, and it sounds like they want to travel, but it's sort of like, oh, we can't be away from our doctor. So that's a topic that we could address today. But I think you've got a way of sort of working with folks that you wanted to share. And then I encourage you all to throw in your questions, your comments. I see Catherine has given us an interesting scenario that we'll talk about. And let's get this topic. Let's start exploring this topic.
Yeah, I love that you brought up the question from yesterday because I think it's a great segue in because so often, like in this situation, it seemed like the parents were concerned about being too far away from their doctors, which I absolutely can understand, right? Our healthcare providers are a lifeline. If something goes wrong, and we're in the community, then we can call them. And if we dial 911, we know which hospital we would go to. And so we already have the how worked out. But the minute you start traveling, the how can be very, can be an unknown. And this is where I find, and I did it myself in the beginnings when I started talking about this with people, we get so bogged down on the how that we forget why we were traveling in the first place. And this goes into what I want to talk about, the framework that I use, because I can tell you straight up that when I started talking to people about traveling with illness, I learned that I was scaring people and it wasn't intentionally. But if you're a healthcare provider and if you're a problem solver, and I think problem solving is kind of my superpower, somebody's telling me, oh, I want to go to Galapagos and I want to go diving with this, I want to go diving with the sharks and I love to dive. And I was in Galapagos diving when I had an experience that didn't go very well, not because of sharks, but, they'll come up with some grand experience. And I'm like, oh, well, I can tell you, we got to, and instantly my mind's thinking, I'm worried about this, these 3 points. And I'm already focused on the how. Well, if a person is managing illness, maybe a progressive, decline, all of a sudden it's like, wait, way too much information in the beginning and people will shut down. So I would strongly encourage, if you're out there and you're working through these problems yourself, and what I've done is I've switched it. And I focus on 3 things. My first being the why, the second being what, and then third, how. And so putting it in that order, it's not minimizing the logistics. I mean, quite frankly, the logistics are can be a pretty heavy level of effort depending on what's going on. But if we focus on the why, as many people know with motivation and mindset, if our why is big enough, we can do a lot. So I'd like to start with that why, if that's good with you. Okay. Good.
I
Okay.
love it.
Okay.
I have to turn off my mic, and it catches me off guard because I start typing into chat and all that stuff, and my keyboard makes too much noise. So, anyways, so yeah, let's kick this off with the
Okay.
why.
With why. Okay. So first I'd like to ask folks, why is traveling important? And this is not a question that is limited to people with some kind of illness or a disability or whatever. I mean, for folks that are listening, why do you travel?
Yeah,
What about it?
so let's for this discussion, just if you want to participate when Andrea asks the why, just type something into chat, and I'll and I can read some of those off and what
Yeah,
have you.
that would
So
be awesome because I am not savvy enough to follow anything.
I
So I'm
got
going to
it.
count on you for that. So when I think about why I travel, I like to learn. I'm a big history buff. So for me, it's about history. I want to make connections. I want to learn about other places that I'm going. I like challenges. I'm kind of an adventurer. I mentioned Galapagos with the sharks. So I like to set goals that keep me healthy, to keep me dialed into activity. Because if I want to sail a sailboat across the Gulf of Maine, or if I want to take it down to the Bahamas, I need to have a certain level of fitness. So my why for traveling could be very similar to anyone's why. I mean, they can be different as well. You can have other reasons, but it isn't, having an illness or a disability doesn't take away that motivation. And I can tell you, when I talk to people like my mom, my dad, other family members who have gone through this path, when they look at traveling, Brene Brown recently shared in her new book, I think The Atlas of the Heart, where she's talking about hope. And the state of hope is kind of built on three aspects. And when you're looking at it, there's this belief that you set a goal and you want to be able to reach that goal, and then you lay out your plans, and that could be a plan A, B, C. And if you think about illness, we talk about mindset when people are fighting illness or living with it. Hope comes into place. So we have goals, we have our plans, and then there's this self-belief that, hey, I think I can pull that off. And it doesn't mean you have to do it alone. There are so many tools and resources out there that it is incredibly possible that you can achieve what you want. I mean, we have people that are blind that get to the top of Mount Everest. And so, I like to keep it in perspective when we're looking at traveling, what our why is.
Okay, great. Well, I've got a few that I want to share with you. I'm also just responding to Alice Fitcher. She wants to share this recording with her group, and absolutely, we encourage that. And Alice, we'll have this up at the end of the day, and you can share that with anybody. But let's see. Let me read a few of these. Kelly Lambert says it helps people remaining the why, of course. It helps people remain engaged in the world and have some fun. Also, say connected with family. Glenna Crook says enrichment, cultural experience, connect with family and friends. Steve says to open new horizons and meet people. Aaron Kershaw says, get a break from everyday responsibilities and regain perspective. Good one there, Aaron. Ellen Davis, in our family, traveling allows us to try new foods, meet new people, see new places and sites that we've learned about or we want to learn about. Catherine Nero says, I love being immersed, hanging out with locals, eating well, sometimes as a guest in a home, seeing nature or architecture. And Michelle Amber says, my husband is in an assisted living and getting long-term care insurance cover. Okay, that's a little bit. We'll get to that question, Michelle. Don't worry. Paula says, make new memories and the ones that we love. And then we've got Suzanne Davis. I'll read yours in a bit. But what a bunch of great ideas and great meanings, and it means something different to everyone. Okay, I'm not going to slow you down there, Andrea.
No, I love it. And that's exactly what I was talking about. And I have a feeling that for most of the people that responded, and if you're sitting there and you're just thinking about this, those whys don't change. If somebody told me today, later today, that I had diabetes, or that I had, you know, uh, a risk, or that I had a high blood pressure, I'm still going to want to figure out, can I scuba dive? Can I go and do the sailing that I want to do? Can I do the type of hiking and adventure travel that I do? And then what do I need to do to still be part of that world? It doesn't go away. And so I think that that's really important when we're looking at traveling with illness, to tap into our why first, because it starts to make everything else manageable. Then what I like to talk about is the what. So what is travel to you, right? And travel can be defined very differently depending on the individual. For my dad, traveling was an overnight trip or a day trip to go and watch my niece, who was on varsity volleyball, go play in a tournament, right? He never really loved to travel. He did it, but you know, it wasn't something he was ever incredibly comfortable with. But towards the end, he became much more accepting, which was interesting because, you think sometimes with dementia, people don't want to go around and do as much. But for him, he became much more accepting of saying, just tell me where you want me to sit, where are we going, put me in the car. Because for him, that day trip of being able to watch her play was incredibly important, not only for him, but for her. So when I look at the what, I say the first to define the experience. Are we talking about day trips to go and look at the leaves fall? Are we, a volleyball tournament? Or are we talking about, a 2-week hike where you're going to do Machu Picchu and then you want to go on an Amazon river cruise? And then, and why I use Machu Picchu as an example is that after you look at how you're going to define that travel, what travel looks like, to set expectations. Machu Picchu is a fantastic example because there are people who want to hike Machu Picchu. I love it. One day I would love to hike Machu Picchu. But here's the thing. Let's say a person has an amputation or severe arthritis, or altitude could be an issue, right? So maybe the idea of hiking Machu Picchu needs to be thought about a little differently. But if we're willing to set expectations, or to expand our expectations, maybe we don't personally have to carry our bag up Machu Picchu. Maybe, and this is kind of getting into the logistics, but maybe we could hire somebody to carry our bag for us. Maybe if the hike is too much of an issue, we take the train. And we just change those expectations so that we still get to do the experience. You still get to the top of Machu Picchu. You just physically aren't the one having to expend as much effort to get to the top. And that's why I really like to talk about the what is travel. And that can be very personal, and it'll be very different for every person that you talk to.
And that's where we as family members, providers, friends, that's where the coaching comes into play, is getting people to sort of look at the world through a slightly different lens and take advantage of this wonderful opportunity, as opposed to sort of completely shutting the door and remaining at home or not taking advantage of the opportunity. Yeah. I mean, being at Disney World is a wonderful experience. Just being there, okay, much better than sitting at home. You might not be able to ride the roller coasters the way that you did when you were 13, but just being there and watching people riding the roller coasters is a wonderful experience.
Exactly. It is there's so much mindset when we think of this. And I love the Disney experience because my dad loved roller coasters, but there was a point where we finally had to say, Dad, I'm not sure if the Yeti ride, because it has this backwards moment with a loop, is quite what you should be doing. Now, in hindsight, if if he'd really wanted to go, I mean, there is a part of you that sits there and goes, they give you the disclaimer, people have a right to do kind of what they want. So, I mean, you have to weigh it. but when I talk about mindset, I know it is very easy, and I've done it myself. It's very easy to think, oh, my fill in the blank loved one, mom, dad, child, couldn't do this experience the way it is. But what if we flip that and it's like my mom, dad, child could do this if I had this intervention or I had this type of assist, what
Great.
would that look like?
Excellent. Well, the questions are coming in fast and furious, but let's address the how, and
Yes.
then we'll just start rattling through all these questions and comments. And thanks everybody for jumping in on this discussion. I'm really looking forward to us reading those. Okay.
Yeah. So how? Now this is where this is where the heavy lifting can come into play. And I just want to throw out a couple of kind of a broad perspective when you go into the planning of the house. One is to recognize autonomy versus hovering. And if you're a family member doing this for a loved one, it can be a balance. I alluded to the fact that my mom wandered off in Belgium. Never, my husband was in the military. I went to Iraq. Never has he looked more freaked out than when he comes back and told me he couldn't find my mom in Belgium. Some shiny object caught her attention and she wandered off. And so we had that in my mind 15 years later when I was at Disney with my dad and we turned around and the wheelchair was empty. And, instantly you're like, oh my gosh, thankfully we knew what dad was wearing, but it turned out he just went into the bathroom. And so you have to, as a family member, I would encourage you to be mindful of autonomy versus hovering. I would also encourage you to communicate with, again, being mindful of overwhelm. So for me, when I was doing this travel with my family, oftentimes I was partnered with my sister. And so I'll use the example of when we took my dad to the beach the last time. We actually had another family that was traveling with us. I think we had 9 people, 3 people under the age of 9. My dad, which he was close to 80, and we had, and everybody else. And we were staying in this massive beach house. Now, my sister and I, we laid out the logistics of what this would look like. We then brought in the parents, the family, the friends, the adults from the other family and said, look, you know what's going on. And of course they did. And they were managing their own children. So we had communication, not only between my sister and I, but this other family. We then created a strategy to always have eyes on Gigi, so to speak, because that's what he went by. And so it would be to make sure that everybody had a good experience. One person was more responsible for just being around in case dad needed us than the other, so that my sister could go spend time with her family, the other family could go spend time with their children, I could go and do whatever I wanted to do, but we would kind of do tag you're it. Now, this was all happening behind the scenes. My dad wasn't necessarily involved in all of this because of the overwhelm risk, but we did communicate. This is what the place is going to look like. This is what we were doing. So I'd say communication is key. Having plans A, B, and C. It makes a difference to know what would you do if. And I often will use that phrase when I'm doing the logistics. I'm talking to people. What would I do if I got sick in Egypt? What would I do if, I had a challenge in the Galapagos? What does an emergency air evacuation look like? Not that I needed that, but for me as a diver, forget, I don't even think about the illness, but just because of the adventure travel, what would I do if I had a problem and I'm 10 hours by boat, away from land? So the planning, A, B, and C, and logistics, they go hand in hand, and then your resources. And we are so fortunate today to be able to have resources. I mean, whether it be wearable tech, whether it be telemedicine, telehealth, the internet, organizations to dig into the weeds, public, about different types of guidelines, public forums, you name it, somewhere there's a way to try to figure this out. It can take a lot, but we have a ton of resources. And in closing on in terms of the how, I would just like to say 2 last pieces. Ask more questions, ask why, spend time listening, and then try to have a sense of humor because the best laid plans, when we took my dad to that beach house, and this was this gorgeous 4-story, rental on the ocean with an elevator. We gave him the penthouse suite, so to speak. We thought he would love it. And on the final day, he looked at me and said, I don't know why we came to this place. It's just not as nice as the other places have been. And I looked at him, I was like, Daddy, what are you talking about? And he goes over to the wall and he touches it. He goes, they didn't finish the walls. There's all these gaps. And I looked at him and I said, Daddy, that's called shiplap. And that is a style. And he's like, oh, I just thought you stuck me in the attic. And I'm like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So you got to laugh through it.
Absolutely. And I think that's the other thing is that it's I regularly remind people that the little mistakes that we make and the things that we do, whether it be on vacation, a meeting like this, a wedding, those are where the memories happen. And sometimes, especially if you're thinking about traveling with your parent with a disability, you're sort of, you can see where families could get really freaked out and feel like this has to be perfect. And none of your family vacations were perfect up to that point. So this one's not going to be perfect either,
That's exactly
but
right.
having that backup plan. So,
Yeah.
all right, we got lots of questions and comments. Let me address the questions and then I'll jump over to the comments here. My husband has long COVID. This is from Paula. And as a result, he is on a high amount of oxygen and doesn't qualify for a portable concentrator. As a result, we would have to take a huge amount of oxygen bottles in the car, which isn't realistic. Any suggestions? We can't go away more than overnight. I think it would be good for his mental well-being if we could travel, which is the why. Okay. So I guess some ideas on for Paula on the how with the oxygen.
Right. And so as I can imagine that everybody in this group, since you have so many healthcare providers, you have a lot of people that are dialed into this world. Um, Very specific challenges often take a little bit more research. And so this, I mean, I can see where the level of effort with this would be very overwhelming. And like you said, how much oxygen would that take? And so I can say I don't have an exact answer for you, but my mind starts to look at partnerships. How can you, so when I problem solve, and I just this is kind of how my mind goes, I start to think of like other examples, other devices, other experiences where there could be limitations based on something. So when I think of something like oxygen, the human body, basically, I look at it as a machine. I often refer to it as like a highly tuned vehicle, right? A precision automobile. So when I start thinking about oxygen, I start thinking about like, battery systems and things in a car. So what is something else that, like an electric vehicle can only go so far, before you need a recharging station, right? And so we look at how do we find those other charging stations. So in terms of when I think of oxygen or dialysis comes up from time to time, I try to think about partnerships and where you're going. And so where the experience may not be one contiguous trip, like I'm going to go from Maine to Key West nonstop. Is there a way to break up the experience, almost like a thru hiker would do on the Appalachian Trail, where they are mailing themselves care packages along the way. And so they know that I've got to go the next 100 miles or the next 200 miles before I hit this town. And when I get to that town, there's going to be this item stage. And that's what I think of, whether it be expeditions, whether I think of, adventure travel. If you think of it, what you're doing is it almost takes on the logistics of an expedition. How do you resupply materials as you go? So that's how I would approach the strategy, and then have to start looking into what are the logistics of, finding those resources along the way, and can they be pre-staged?
Yeah, and I really bet that the oxygen supplier that you're using is probably going to be one of your best resources.
Exactly.
And could probably connect you with other individuals that have done things similar. In addition, what I was thinking, because of the tank, thinking of scuba diving, really what you want is you want to know that when you go, let's say you go from Washington, D.C., and you just go up to Baltimore for the day. If we're in an emergency and we need more, where is the supplier in Baltimore? It's sort of like that tank that you just anchor at 15 feet when you're doing a deep dive. It's so that
Exactly.
you can have that peace of mind. So hopefully that's a good solution. Great example there. Okay, Burke Dillon says, I'm looking for websites for short-term rentals that let you sort by walk-in showers and elevators on the condo floor. There used to be a site like that for Paris, but it's no longer around. I don't think you can get this on VRBO or Airbnb. Others might want an array of disability, like universal design, wheelchair accessible, what have you. Andrea, any suggestions on that in terms of hotels or Airbnbs or accessible places or lodging that is specific to a person's disability?
Right. I don't have a specific resource to go to. I have found in these circumstances that it is best just to talk directly to the business unit. Because even if a website says something, I don't necessarily trust it. And so I like to have eyeballs on it, or at least somebody's name to confirm what I'm looking at. And then that way, particularly if I was going to make a referral to somebody to go someplace, I mean, if I couldn't see it, I'd want somebody to take a picture of it, so that I would at least have some kind of confidence. But in terms of a broader resource, whenever I think of looking for something as specific as what you're asking, I will think about going to the organizations, like you said, kind of with the oxygen. Go to the organization that best fits. You know, if it's like the Diabetes Association, if it's the celiac. Now granted, those are not quite the same as mobility, but Parkinson's, diseases that align with mobility challenges, oftentimes have a series of tools on their web pages that can at least direct you to a public forum or somebody in your area that might be able to help. Also, looking for those, Facebook, whether we like it or hate it, there are groups everywhere now. And so being able to tap into the public social media aspect of looking, for people with similar challenges at your destination, see what they're saying. They may have some resources that never make it onto the broader internet.
So this is pretty cool. I just pulled up. I hope everybody can see this on my screen. I pulled up Airbnb and I went on the filters and look at what they've got here. Now, again, to Andrea's point, you've got to confirm with the host. Don't take it for granted. But they have added accessibility features, and look at how extensive they are. Guest
Mhm.
entrance and parking, bedroom, bathroom, step 3 bathroom, shower grab bar, ceiling or adaptive equipment, ceiling or mobile host. That's really amazing, and it's wonderful. I know that this is due to requests from the people with disability community, but I'm very impressed. Now, I didn't do a search, and I didn't do a search on the specific place where you all are searching, but knowing that that's in there, you could do a search specifically anywhere in the country, find me a home that has a mobility hoist, and hopefully a few of those come up. So great question there.
Yeah, love that.
Judith asks, are there tour groups for people with wheelchairs or roller walkers?
I mean, I see tour groups for everybody. And again, typically this is in Facebook. Um, Depending on where you're going, I think you would absolutely find some. I don't have, again, when it came to this conversation, I didn't bring a lot of specifics, but I know that I have seen. I mean, I was flying to I think it was the Cayman Islands, and there was a small charter flight, and 12 scuba divers, wheelchair scuba divers, were getting on board that flight. So, and they were going. No, wait, it was Bimini. And I'm trying to think. I'm getting confused on my scuba experiences. But where they were going, there was a hotel that was formerly owned by I think it was like a veteran who had lost a leg. And so it was very wheelchair friendly. And so these scuba divers were all going, they're all wheelchair divers. And so I definitely think that you would find tour groups that cater to to those needs. And
Yeah,
it just
and
takes like some keyword searching.
I just did just a very quick search in Google and look at this wonderful company, Wheel the World, and you
Hmm.
can see multi-day trip to Costa Rica, and there's an individual with a wheelchair, and they've got a bunch of other multi-day destinations and what have you. So yeah, a little Google search should help identify some resources there. And uh, okay. Russell Warren says, not really a question, but please focus on how people with disability would handle travel and not so much how to manage the person with this. Okay, so what Russell is saying is, how can a person with disability handle travel, not necessarily how we as loved ones are going to handle that person.
Right, right, right. And so I think that it's a similar approach. Why do you want to travel? What is that going to look like? And then the how. And I think that for you or anybody that wants to travel, you have to look at where your potential failure points are in the process, right? What are the threats, the risks, so to speak? And so if it's a situation where you require, specific type of medications, making sure that you travel with enough medication, making sure that you understand wherever you're going, do they allow your medications into that country, right? That can that can happen from time to time. That maybe you can only bring so many days supply of a certain drug in without having to have a healthcare provider sign off on the prescription. Um, it's basically laying out the entire experience, and then you knowing who you are, potential challenges that you might encounter during that time. What if I got a call, and this was right when COVID started, from another pharmacist. I think the person was in Northern Africa and had ended up being delayed because of the flights, when everything kind of shut down. And the prescription medication that the individual takes had a different drug name overseas, and they were sourcing it from somewhere in Europe. And so, I mean, it got incredibly complex because we were trying to find the drug that was most similar, because they had other versions of it. They just didn't have that particular one. And so just being able to think, what happens if I get stuck here longer than I anticipate? If you're traveling, and particularly if you're overseas, and what if your flights are delayed 3 days, 7 days, 2 weeks? What if something is happening? Do you have all the supplies you need? If you use insulin, do you have needles? Do you have the syringes? Do you have everything that you would need? Now, granted, in this global world, many places that people travel, we can find substitutions or things that are very similar. But I think in terms of when you're traveling, it just counts on you to look at what your life looks, if you have special food requirements, and then strategize on how could you take that with you? Can you take that with you? And then what would that look like? And then understanding what the resources are available when you get to where you're going.
I love it. Okay. I'm going through the comments now, and there's some great ones here. The first one with Catherine Nero. She talks about how she took, because she's a backpacker, her parents let her plan out a trip to Japan in 2019. And as she was mapping it out and there was going to be walking, she was surprised that the parent that used the cane didn't have as much difficulty with the walking as the one that seemed to always walk in front of her when they're around here at home. And I think that speaks to what we were talking about in the beginning. Prepare, plan, but you're going to be surprised. But that really speaks to the value of assistive devices. And the thing that I love about going to Europe and overseas is that around here we use the single canes. In most countries, they use the dual ski pole walking sticks, which
Hmm.
can are great for people of all ages.
Hmm. Yeah, I've been passed by a group of folks that, I mean, best guess they were probably north of 70, maybe 80. while hiking in Germany, and they were all using the hiking sticks. And of course, we're looking around going, "Wow, we need to up our game." So yeah, I love that. And there are so many adaptive devices. I believe I just saw a comment pop up where somebody said they're going to the beach and they wondered about the wheelchairs with the bigger tires. I encourage folks again when you're looking at where you're going to look for those durable medical good supply places or the community pharmacies, the smaller pharmacies, and sometimes the bigger ones do as well. But the specialty item places, if you use a vendor in your hometown, maybe they have a resource list that they can see what exists, where you're going. But there are so many different adaptive devices that it really has opened up the world to more seamless travel, and people are speaking up. People want these services, and like you did with your Google search, um, there's a market there, and so people being able to come in and build businesses around supporting these folks.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I like that we're starting this discussion with this broad topic, and because everybody's travel is a little bit different. So, but one thing that maybe we can do as a follow up is reach out to one of these organizations like Wheel the World, and which is more of a tour guide,
Mhm.
and sort of have them share how it works in their system, and it gives us all food for thought. Peggy Lassiter says, "I'm a retired community health nurse. I have some difficulty walking for long stretches. I'm doing PT, but progress is slow." And I think any words of wisdom for Peggy? One of my thoughts is, Peggy, I think this is where redefining what travel might be, because I'm going to share a story of when I went to I always like to sort of cover a lot of distance when I travel, walk around a city, really get to know it, get on a bike, start riding. When my son was, knee high, I basically learned that I could only walk 2 blocks in about 3 hours. But I started to enjoy that slow pace with my son. And it's sort of reinventing how you might travel. And maybe you find one of these destinations where you can sit on a balcony, and as opposed to you walking, you're watching the village walk by and what have you. But Andrea, any thoughts for Peggy?
Right. I definitely, it's almost like you can sense that frustration in what she's seeing. And I think that this is when it really taps into mindset and going back and revisiting your why and, approaching it like anything you do with goals, put some pictures up, think about why you're wanting to do this, but then also, like Steve suggested, look at the expectations. Can it look a little different and still give you the feeling and the enjoyment that you had? And there's a gentleman I met years ago. His name's Stan Waterman. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie The Deep, but he was one of the principal underwater photographers. He was living up in Maine. I went to a scuba convention. He was in his late 70s or 80s. I've talked to him a handful of times, and he was recording in journals how different diving looked for him. I mean, this was when he was younger, a big, strong, man out there diving, in these crazy conditions. And by the time he was still diving in his 80s, but he would get into the water without his gear on. Somebody would then lower the gear in to the water because he couldn't put it, he couldn't carry the maybe 100 pounds and then jump in with confidence. And then as it got towards the end, he actually had lost his vision in one eye. And so he had somebody that dove with him, and there's no harm in it looking different. I mean, he was still underwater taking these gorgeous photographs and, he's still fully engaged, just a little differently. So I think, like Steve said, expectations in your why help a lot. And then setting those micro goals. How do you celebrate and reward yourself along the way? That's a huge thing of celebrate the victories. We get this big idea that, I've got to get to the top of Machu Picchu, but, get to the end of the street, get up a local trail, work your way forward. And then, whatever a reward looks like for you, celebrate it.
Yeah, great suggestions. Okay, Suzanne Davis has a heart-wrenching story here. She's, been a senior consultant and in the nursing home industry, but she has a failed back fusion. She's managing severe chronic pain, and her loved ones live in Houston, LA, and Michigan, and it's um, just very difficult to get through these journeys because of the pain. Um, any any suggestions there for
So for some,
Suzanne?
so for something like that, this is one of those times where, I mean, you provided a lot of detail, but this is why, like, if we were doing a consult, I'd really have to have a better understanding of what is the concern specifically. I mean, obviously, pain management and logistics come to mind, but is it, not being able to get prescriptions filled in a different area? The fully understanding context with the stories is important, because I could think, oh well, this is the solution for something like that, and yet that wasn't even something that crossed your radar. You had something completely else in your mind. Steve, you have my contact information if people want to reach out. That could be something to do, but it sounds like you've got a lot on your plate, and so then how can you chip away at that depending on what you're most concerned with, or what's driving the limitation.
Yeah, and having somebody like Andrea just as a sounding board to help break down those monumental challenges into smaller pieces and or hand it over to someone. And I think this is a good time because actually a question from Emily Shoemaker, who runs a business called Vaccine Valet. It's a pretty cool business that she started there. She was asking, do you have a guide or a pamphlet that's a checklist of things that one or various illnesses can use to help them prepare for a trip? But piggybacking on that, if you've got some resources, that's great. But also, it sounds like folks can hire you to help map out their game plan.
Exactly. I do have resources. I mean, I have a website. I can tell you it's not quite as updated as I would like. I don't think they ever are. We build them and then they just kind of, they exist. Um, but in terms of the travel health piece, you can see some of the types of services that I offer. I can do, in terms of like broad-based coaching through a generic situation, like I need to be able to get from point A to B. I do that type of coaching, problem solving, logistics, or I can actually, be the one that you offload it to. And I know it's interesting because this kind of straddles that piece of advocacy. I have a lot of friends that are healthcare providers that talk about, in my family, I'm the advocate for my family with their health. And when we talk about with my dad with his dementia towards the end, I tell you, I wish that I had hired an advocate, because there gets to be a point where, as for me, the expectation is the healthcare provider, in the family, that I understand the system, I know the questions to ask, I'm trying to look ahead. It makes it harder for me to be in the moment. And I can tell you, because the way that my dad passed was far from what we anticipated. He fell and he fractured his neck. I mean, this was a horrible, catastrophic experience within COVID. And, I think there's a unique type of guilt maybe and pain that healthcare providers feel when you can't fix a situation that is so far beyond what anyone could fix. And so in terms of solving some of these logistical challenges, I just like to throw that out there, that while you may be able to do this, sometimes it behooves you to be more in the moment as opposed to the one running around behind the scenes. Because my sister and I will joke about how when we come home, we'd need a vacation from vacation. We wouldn't have ever not done it, but it is something to think about.
Yeah, and again, just like the oxygen resource for that last question, talk to your pain management physicians. I mean,
Exactly.
but or work with Andrea and or a care manager or somebody and say, can you talk on my behalf to the pain management physician? I
Right.
think that a lot of times they have obviously been through this scenario and may be able to break it down more than you would.
Right.
Let's
Well,
see,
I'm
Wes.
sorry, Steve. Let me just add, and that's one of the reasons why when it comes to pain management, having that better understanding of the why and listening to what the obstacles are, because I might think, oh, well, if you're thinking of trying to travel with logistics and maybe you might need additional resource, you might need prescriptions filled. And now you're going into this place of, as a pharmacist, I'm thinking, with the focus on the opioid situation. And I'm not saying that's what's going on, but my mind could immediately go there, that you're worried about getting refills or doctors know who you are. That can all be that can be taken care of before you go. So, your doctors have communicated, they have somebody that's like a partner. This is where I talked about partnerships earlier. When you get to X location, these resources, they've already been verified. They know who you are. It takes away some of that awkwardness that somebody might feel. Not that it should be, if they needed it for, legitimate purposes, but I don't know if that's where the problem is, or if it's just that you're in chronic pain and finding somebody else to be able to help with that piece.
I love it. Okay. Wes Morrison has a great suggestion. One thing in preparing for travel is to find where the English speaking hospital is located. Maybe have a sheet with you on conditions you have using Google Translate for the language where you're going. I was just in the Dominican Republic. I have to say, Google Translate is absolutely amazing when you run into somebody that doesn't speak the language. You just pass your phone back and forth and you can have this great conversation. Um,
I Yeah, I love that he brought that up. I lived in Europe before where we were still just barely texting. So 2003 to six, and we would joke about going to the Czech Republic and driving down a road, looking at a map, and my husband's asking what the name of the street is, and I was like, "Well, the first three letters of the word are this, with about 20 letters after it. I have no idea." And so, yes, we have so many tools. And I love that he brought up the English speaking hospitals because it can be very, very different depending on where you're going. And sometimes you might think that and it's also private versus public hospitals. Uh, Also comes up depending on what country you're going into, because you might think that, oh, I have to go to this hospital, but then you find out that $25, $50, $100 got you to a different hospital, and the care is very different. And so understanding the resources and the logistics at the destination, and I have a whole process where I go through looking at actually the risks of where the destination is, things from like emergency evacuation, natural disaster, which is why you might be able to tell that, I could scare people when we start talking about it if we get hyper focused on the how in the beginning, because there's a lot to think about if we are leaving the country and we do have these more complicated medical cases. I'm a big believer in emergency evacuation insurance, and I've even thought about getting it for myself because it's relatively cost effective, and no, I don't have problems. um, you'd be surprised what travel insurance versus travel health insurance versus what emergency evacuation insurance covers. And then even in those plans, it can vary drastically.
Oh, this is great. Kelly Lambert says, my stepfather used to have to obtain a letter from his doctor and have it translated into Spanish as well to explain what a CPAP machine was. He and my mother experienced so much hassle when they would travel to third world countries. Yeah, medical devices like a CPAP, while they're more common and we're familiar with them here and in developing countries, you could see where a third world country would be like, "What is this?" And not being able to communicate with the folks in the airport.
Right.
Um,
There's a resource online with the State Department that will talk about what the medical system, what the pharmaceutical system, so to speak, more of the drug system is like in different countries. And it is intriguing to see what countries will have quantity limitations on certain medications, things that, like in the US, we think of opioids. That seems to be the buzzword that everybody focuses on. But I was surprised to see that some countries had limitations on antipsychotics, antidepressants, things that we wouldn't think of. Some countries will have a pill count requirement, so to speak, so that what you show up with, I mean, it was baffling to me until I read it. So you show up with X amount, you should leave with Y amount to make sure that you aren't distributing on the streets. Um, I've been asked just, in passing from people, should I disclose that I'm traveling with certain kind of drug? I can tell you, at least this is how I perceive, that the last thing you want to have happen is to be pulled off in some kind of random, search, boarding a plane, leaving a country. It happened to my husband leaving. I can't remember where we were leaving, but they just randomly called out a bunch of names and 20 people left. And I'm like waiting to get on the plane, and he comes back and he's like sweating, and he's like, they had machine guns. They searched everything. And so I am not a fan of what is it? Ask for forgiveness, not permission, in those circumstances.
Yeah.
Because that can really not work out to your advantage.
Yeah. No, great. And I just looked at the clock. It's after 1. We got a
Sorry.
few more. This is great. It shows that this is a great conversation. We got a few more comments that I'd like to get through. And just a reminder to anybody that has to jump off, this is recorded. We'll send out the recording and all the chat as well. But Glenna Crooks has a great comment, and I'm paraphrasing this, but she traveled down to Florida to help her mom move into an assisted living. And then she had a back spasm and had to go through, a bunch of sort of crisis decisions traveling with a disability, shipping her luggage home, getting the wheelchair in the airport, which she enjoyed that ride. But it just makes you, these are good rules of thumb, and none of us have a crystal ball. So in this case, it's sort of like, oh, I'm going to help my mom who needs assisted living, and I'm in a wheelchair now. Let's see. Burke says, I found India surprisingly easy as for someone in a wheelchair. People are amazingly helpful, and you can hire people to help. I had a wheelchair pusher who had pushed Stephen Hawking. What a great story, Burke.
Oh, wow.
Let's see. Bonnie Davies says, I also can't stand for too long or walk long distances. I've been using wheelchair services at the airline, and it's gotten me to the next gate on time. Yeah.
Mhm.
And let's see. I put contact information for Andrea in there. I'm a member of the Aging Life Care Association. We have care managers all throughout the United States. Yes, if you're not familiar with Aging Life Care managers, you can get them anywhere, at least in the United States, that you're traveling. And what a great solution. The idea of, if you were traveling with mom or dad, connect with an Aging Life Care manager where you live and maybe get a referral from one where you're visiting. They can talk together. You can map out a plan. Great suggestion there, Aaron. Let's see. Ellen says, Andrea, you're correct. Evacuation coverage is not costly, and it's a great solution. And Burke says, I have a apnea machine. I got a medical Red Cross symbol sewed on it with a ribbon tied to it on my carry-on. That definitely helps. Good suggestion.
Mhm.
Shauna Main says, use AAA to set up yeah. AAA, again, this is a travel organization, tapping into them as a resource, because she used AAA to set up wheelchair transport at airports and used dialysis guest services to set up transient treatment. And wheelchair services at airport left me at the gate that was closed and moved. Uh-oh, yeah.
Oh, no.
Got to be careful. I mean, again, plan for a backup. So what a great discussion. We got through it all. Doesn't surprise me that our first discussion on travel was this engaged. A couple of things that came out of this conversation that I want to follow up on is, let's see if maybe we can get one of these travel providers out there and find out what it's like taking a trip with them. The other thing that this reminded me of is maybe we do a discussion on traveling with your grandchildren. Irregardless of disability, traveling with grandchildren is a wonderfully rewarding experience. And the fact that things are opening up now more with COVID means that we probably couldn't have done that over the last 2 years. So maybe that could be, those are two discussions I could see following up with here, Andrea.
Exactly. I love the intergenerational travel. My sister was taking my dad on many a road trip to watch my niece, and it was interesting to watch the dynamics change because when they were little, dad was always the one covering down on them, of where they were running, and then as they got a little bit older, they knew their role was to make sure that my dad, stayed close by, and so they learned. I think they learned empathy. I think they learned the realities of caring for folks and giving. And I think that that's an important lesson as well. They were still having conversations. Dad was fully engaged, is to the best of his ability. And it didn't scare them as much because it was more of a normal experience. And so I think that that's a fantastic topic to cover.
Okay, let's see. Michelle Amber said, didn't answer my question on long-term care insurance being at risk. I apologize. There's so many questions there, but I think I get the gist of this. If you had long-term care insurance and you're traveling, potentially there could be a risk of losing that coverage. I'm not sure. Again, Michelle, I apologize. Feel free to email me or Andrea, and hopefully we can do some research and help you with that because for whatever reason, I can't.
It's probably
find that.
policy specific. I'm just guessing, because
that would be my thought. Yeah.
So you'd have to find out what the terms of the policy are, duration, things like
Well,
that.
and I could see this especially if somebody is in, let's say mom's in assisted living and we want to bring her on a beach vacation, which I think is wonderful. In fact, actually years ago, there was an assisted living provider who tried to take a few residents to a beach vacation. Or yeah, he did take it. He's no longer operating. I don't think for that reason, but I'd love to have him on this discussion. The other person that I'm going to track down is Insight Memory Care used to do a caregiver cruise. I know that there are these caregiver cruises where caregivers with their loved ones who might have some early Alzheimer's cognitive impairment, they go on a cruise together and they have paid caregivers there to support and everything. So I think there's a bunch of follow-ups that we can do to this discussion, but I'm really glad that you opened the door for us, Andrea.
No, it was my pleasure. I'm so excited that we had the opportunity, and I love that there's been so much engagement. Without my reading glasses, I can't see, but the number looks really big.
Yeah. So this is great. Well, thanks everyone again. Thank you, Andrea, and we'll follow up with the recording and contact info. And we'll see you. Hopefully, see most of you tomorrow for Solo Aging. You don't want to miss that discussion.
No, she's fantastic. I love it. Solo traveling as you age too. I can just see that one.
Exactly. Okay. Talk to you soon.
All right. Bye-bye.